Thank you for the clarification. The reprise du débat, resuming debate, the honourable member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I begin my remarks, I would be remiss if I did not mention a great man who has been mentioned many times today in this House, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who's enjoying his 59th birthday today. So happy birthday, Prime Minister Harper. Exactly. So I rise today to speak on Bill C-48, which aims to ban oil tanker traffic on the northern coastline of British Columbia. You know, this legislation is yet another blatant attack on Canada's energy sector, along with all the high-paying and high-quality jobs that go with it. You know, this government can talk about balancing the environment and the economy, but this proposed legislation is not balanced, and it is a direct threat to the viability of Canada's energy sector. This bill not only threatens jobs and the prosperity of Canada, but also the solvency of our governments. Furthermore, it fails to respect our commitment to First Nations because the Liberals failed to consult and are discriminating against First Nations who support energy development. You know, this legislation sends a clear message that our country is closing up for business, and industry leaders are listening. Energy giants are already beginning to move their operations to Texas, taking jobs with them. Where will the wealth creation and tax revenues that are needed to finance our transition go? Straight south of the border, leaving Canada in a vulnerable position with few resources as we seek to embrace change and innovation. The failure of our energy industry is simply not an option. Although oil prices have doubled over the last 2 years, while governments in Edmonton and Ottawa continue to run substantial deficits. And I would like to see a government start trimming these deficits, but the Liberals can't seem to kick the habit of spending more than they take in, even with significant tax hikes on small businesses. Mr. Speaker, how is this government ever going to balance the budget while they campaign actively to phase out the very industry responsible for those revenues? This doesn't square. Budgets simply don't balance themselves, and the government must either raise taxes, cut spending, or as we propose on this side of the House, grow the economy. Not as the Prime Minister suggests, from the heart outwards, but by embracing the real opportunities in the energy sector. You know, the Minister of the Environment recently said in an interview that hard things are hard, and they certainly are. But this government has made things harder on the families who rely on the energy sector because of their ideological approach to energy development. Take, for example, that this Liberal Prime Minister ran in the election on a promise to cancel the Northern Gateway pipeline. He didn't run on a promise to review the science or to act in the national interest. No, he made a promise because it was politically expedient to do so. And that's the easy thing to do. But the problem with taking the easy way out is that someday you have to pay the price. And today, as we watch the dying throes of Canada's last best hope of getting energy to Tidewater, we have only the Liberals to blame. They are now doubling down on their mistakes. They are not content just to cancel Northern Gateway. They are legislating for future generations to ensure that no pipeline will even be considered for the Northwest Coast. And actions have consequences, and those consequences are hard. The families of my constituents know that all too well. The reason for their hardship is because this Liberal government made rash promises, not founded on reason or science, but on political calculation. And rather than recognizing that fact, they are closing their minds and their hearts to the hardships of Canadians. The bill before us today is an attempt to dig up the corpse of Northern Gateway and put it on trial. It is a declaration to the world that never again will a pipeline be considered to our north. This moratorium is not based on science. It is not even based upon the national interest of Canada. It is a political exercise to try and appease those who oppose the Trans Mountain Pipeline and who frankly will oppose any energy infrastructure that their foreign masters will pay them to oppose. And when will these Liberals show some backbone and stop caving in to foreign interests and radical activists and instead stand up for the science and stand up for Canadians? You know, if this Liberal government were to extrapolate the logic and apply it consistently across the country, they would severely hurt our economy. Oil tankers enter Canada daily through the Port of Vancouver, on the East Coast, and through the St. Lawrence River without incident. And the sad thing is, for the most part, these vessels have circumnavigated the globe to bring Canada energy from other countries, energy that we have ample reserves of ourselves. In ports like St. John, New Brunswick, Millions of tons of energy products have been shipped and provide jobs necessary for the prosperity of our eastern provinces. If Bill C-48 passes, this government will be setting a precedent for our entire coastline that will reverberate across our country, killing jobs and opportunities for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me talk about the hypocrisy of this Liberal government, a government that stands up every day in this House to malign the reputation of former Prime Minister Harper, a man they accuse of not consulting with First Nations on energy development. Let's talk about the Lakwalam First Nation and the 9 tribes whose traditional territory lies within the zone that this moratorium would apply to. Did this government consult with the Lakwalam, or do they only negotiate with First Nations who oppose energy development? The 9 tribes on the West Coast have issued a legal challenge to this moratorium and this legislation. And I wonder, will the Liberal government respect Aboriginal sovereignty, and will they fulfill their duty to consult? Because evidently they have not. The Lakwalam are fighting them in court. They are fighting for their economic future, for the future of their children, and this Liberal government is disrespecting them and discriminating against them with this legislation. It is shameful, Mr. Speaker, not only because it is the wrong thing to do, but because it flies in the face of everything this Liberal government claims to believe in. And for those who are reasonably concerned about environmental impact of oil tankers on our coast, let's look at some facts. In 2011, the Conservative government undertook the development and implementation of a world-class tanker safety system. This included modernization of navigation systems, enhanced area response planning, and ensuring that polluters paid for spills and damages caused by accidents in operations. And as a result of this legislation, on top of Canada's sterling record of environmental safety, there has never been a major oil spill on our West Coast. And now the Liberals are pouring in more resources for ocean protection, but for what purpose if they are not allowing development to proceed? Why are we spending taxpayer dollars to the tune of $1.5 billion if they're just going to ban the tankers in the first place? It's another example of this government's absolute incompetence when it comes to responsible development and environmental protection. In the best case scenario, even if this legislation only leads to preventing tankers from operating on the Northwest Coast, it would be an act of supreme unfairness for those communities on the coast. If there's a lack of infrastructure to protect from or mitigate a possible spill, then perhaps some of this Liberal money should be going towards that solution. Surely if this legislation is their solution, then it should be sufficient to protect our Northwest Coast. And if oil tankers are as big of a threat as the Liberals are claiming, why have they not invested in better ocean protection on every coast? Why are they not speaking in Halifax or St. John's or any other Atlantic city on the importance of protecting against oil spills with new funding? And the fact is, they are not, because they know full well that there is no clear threat of a catastrophic oil spill. They are merely trying to score political points by shutting down an entire coast from any development, hurting communities like the Lakwalam in the process. It is a shameful state of affairs, Mr. Speaker, when a government chooses to put its own political self-interest ahead of the interests of all Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions.